Very good. This is the February 16th, 2021 meeting of the City of Charleston Board of Zoning Appeals Zoning. Present are Mr. Judon, Ms. Grass, Ms. Richards, Mr. Bennett, and Mr. Robinson. Present from the planning staff are Ms. Ellington, who we welcome back after a long absence, and we're so happy to have you with us again. Also present from the city are Ms. Ashby and Mr. Batchelder. These proceedings are being recorded, and we ask that those who speak identify themselves for the record. We'll conduct this meeting in usual fashion. We'll first receive information from city staff about the application and their recommendation. If the recommendation is favorable and no one objects to the application, usually the Board of Zoning Appeals treats the matter as being uncontested and passes it as a matter of course. If, however, the city recommends against the application, or there is opposition to the application, we treat the application as contested and hear from the applicant and anyone else who is in favor of the application. Next, we hear from anyone opposed, followed by a short rebuttal from the applicant. We then close the public hearing portion of the meeting for that particular application and open discussion to the Board of Zoning Appeals members only. We'll then make a decision to approve with conditions, or deny the application. The Board of Zoning Appeals zoning has authority to do three things. First, to hear appeals to decisions of the zoning administrator. Second, to grant special exceptions, a fact-finding function of the board. And third, to grant variances to the zoning ordinance if the application meets the hardship test outlined in section 54-924 of the ordinance. The board may deliberate and make a final decision on a matter by a majority of vote of members present at the hearing and qualified to vote, provided that not less than a quorum is present and qualified to vote. However, an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the board members present and voting shall be required before a use variance may be granted. For a variance to be granted, the Board of Zoning Appeals must make the following findings. A, that there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. B, these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. C, because of these conditions, the application of the ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. And D, the authorization of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. First item on the agenda is a review of the minutes of the January 19th, 2021 BZA-Z board meeting. I'm going to exercise the chair's prerogative of this and defer the hearing of this first item on the agenda to the next meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Item number 2 is 692 Arcadian Way, Avondale. Request an appeal of the zoning administrator's decision to deny a subdivision that would create 4 lots that do not meet the minimum 105-foot lot frontage requirement on a public right-of-way, zoned SR1. Mr. Batchelder.
So this is a continuation basically of the discussion that took place last meeting 2 weeks ago, during which the board voted to approve the appeal. And you all asked that I come back with information showing what the average lot frontage calculation or minimum lot frontage calculation should be based on a different approach to calculating that. So I have done that, but before I get to that new information, let me just briefly go over this again. To say that this is a property on Arcadian Way in Avondale in West Ashley. It is shown the location is shown on this map, and Arcadian Way is the street that runs right here across the front of the property, and then there's a court right here called Reveille Court. Then moving on, this is an aerial view. This shows the existing home on that property. And the question is, what is the minimum lot frontage requirement for the subdivision of this property? And in granting the appeal, the board asked that I come back and consider, I'll just skip through those, consider calculating that in a different way than I had calculated it. So this is the subject property right here. You asked that I not include the lot right here at 815 Arcadian or Colony Drive, 815 Colony Drive, and calculate the 4 lots on Reveille Court in a different way, and then count 701 Arcadian Way, count the frontage, the narrow frontage along this side of the lot versus the long frontage that I was using along, that is directly opposite the 692 Arcadian lot. So when I do that, I come back, I came up with 2 different average lot frontages, which would then translate into being the minimum frontage required for the subdivision of 692 Arcadian Way. This is one of those methods. So using the actual distances of this line and then this line right here, I came up with, and including the 75-foot frontage of 701 Arcadian Way, I came up with an average requirement of 77.5 feet. So an average lot frontage of 77.5 feet, which then would be the minimum frontage for the new lots created out of 692 Arcadian Way. So that's one method of calculating the frontage, average frontage of surrounding lots. And then the next calculation, and this is just a close-up view of each one of those numbers that I've circled in red to come up with that average, and adding the 75-foot frontage for 701 Arcadian. Then the next exhibit shows, this is, I guess, option B is the way I've labeled it. It shows, I guess, what I consider to be the chord length. If you just stretch a straight line from each corner of the 4 lots on Reveille Court, you come up with these numbers indicated here. And that gives you an average of 82 feet when you include the 701 Arcadian Way frontage. So 82 feet, or actually, I'm sorry, did I say, yeah, 82 feet or 77.5 are the 2 averages that I came up with that then become the minimum, depending on which way the board would like to go.
Mr. Patchellen, excuse me
Yes.
for interrupting, but as a matter of procedure, it seems to me on this particular item number 2, the board had a question as to the method of calculation and had recommended maybe looking into another, which you've explained here. But it seems to me that the item number 2 is an appeal to the zoning administrator's decision to decide a subdivision based upon other calculations. So it seems to me that we approve that appeal, and the specific information as to how the calculation is made, it would be covered in item number 3. if we are approving the appeal, that means it gets reheard. And then we hear calculations of the numbers in a fashion that we would like to hear.
Okay, so I guess I'll be happy to.
So I think last week we approved the appeal.
Right.
And so that would really be kind of redundant, would it not, to go through that again when we just, it's not like the presentation was made in that item number 2 as to what the lot frontage should be, but that would be covered in item number 3.
And I know the applicant, Mr. Barr, I believe he's on the, let's see. Yes, I see him here, so I can unmute him and promote him to a panelist. And if you'd like to hear from him as well before we move to the variance, or should we just
in the item number 2, it doesn't really identify what the question is. It just says that they're appealing the decision of the calculation. And it seems like after you hear the appeal, then it opens the case back up and is covered in detail under item 3.
So how would you like to proceed?
Well, I'm happy to hear from anybody else, any comments that anyone else has, but we actually approved number 2 last week, and
That's true.
we approved the appeal. And so we're, here it is again, we're asking for it again, but item 3 really gets into the details of the calculations of how the frontage is calculated. And I think the board asked for you to look at it, take a second look, and it seems to me that we would cover that along with all the items on the approval or disapproval of the proposed subdivision under item 3.
Okay. So I'm gonna promote Mr. Barr first because I want to make sure that. So I'm promoting him.
Did Mr. Barr, was he present when I made my comments?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Am I unmuted now?
yes, you are.
You want to swear Mr. Barr in?
Sure. Mr. Barr, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Can
Mr.
you
Barr,
start?
you heard my comments. Do you have anything to say about what I said?
Yes, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, what you did grant the appeal. You approved the appeal, but what was unresolved at the end of that appeal was the manner in which the front footage of these Reveille Court lots would be calculated. Let me back up and say that the subdivision at issue is, I don't know whether, Lee, you have that graphic
I do.
available. The
That
subdivision
slide.
at issue is a proposed 4 lots at this Arcadian Way property. I think it's, is it 692, I guess?
Correct.
Right. And so here's where we are. And Mr. Batchelder, what I was arguing was that there should be a linear calculation of these 4 Reveille Court lots. In other words, there are 4 lots which are within a width of 312.37 feet. That would be the earlier, so there are 4 lots within a space of 312.37 square feet. So that on a linear measurement, those 4 lots average 77.5 feet in width on a linear measurement. And when I say linear, I mean from left to right along the width of the property. If you go to the chord measurement, which would be B, the chord measurement, the total of those chord lengths is 335 feet. And that's more than 22 feet wider than the space within which the 4 lots is contained. So here's where we are, because I don't think the board decided one way or the other how the frontages would be measured on Reveille Court. If the board decides that my linear measurement applies, which would be a total width of 312.37 divided by 4, which is 77.5 feet, and then added back to that lot across the street, the average is 77.4 feet. And the subdivision at issue is I'm going to back up. If you take the linear measurement plus the lot on the corner, the average width is 77.5 feet. The subdivision at issue, the width is 77.4 feet, de minimis. So if the board agrees that the measurement is the linear option, then with the linear option applicable, I think Mr. Batchelder agrees that the subdivision would be approved. And there would be no need, therefore, to discuss a variance. On the other hand, if the chord option is used, and we can go to that, if the chord option is used, that total distance, this is not shown here, but I've added it, the total of those chord distances is 335 feet. Again, as an aside, that's 22 feet more than the width of the property. But anyhow, 33, so that the average of those 4 lots would then become 82 feet. And then adding the the lot across the street, then the average becomes 82 feet, which means that's somewhat 4 feet wider than the proposed. And so if the board were to adopt the chord reconciliation, then we would have to go to the discussion of the variance. But that could be avoided by simply accepting the linear measurement. And the illogic that I would bring to the table as to accepting the chord measurement is that the total of those chord lengths is 22.63 feet wider than the space within which the 4 lots are contained. And I think that the legislative intent behind this lot front footage was to prevent the chopping up of subdivision lots into much smaller slices. So it defeats that actual purpose to say that we measure this chord width. I won't belabor this again, but you might remember I went to great lengths last time to take you through the history of Avondale subdivision. And I think we showed overwhelmingly that the pattern of front footage in Avondale is 75 feet. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for hearing me say that. But so I think you can avoid agenda item 3 if you accept the proposition that the linear option creates an average of 77.5 feet. In our property, 77.4, again, a de minimis difference. I think should be approved.
Okay, well, the way I see it where we are right now is last week, we based our approval on the inclusion of a lot that the board did not feel warranted inclusion in the calculation. And also the lot across the street, the board felt the one leg of the lot, the long leg along the street facing the applicant's lot should not have been measured, but the lot up at the top of the street. I think that's what we based the approval on. And we felt that we were requesting the administrator to go back and do the calculation. Now it's presented that we're looking at the board is being requested to consider how the width of the lots, particularly along Revelry Court, are being measured. So if the board chooses to take Mr. Barr's rendition of the way those lots are measured, or Mr. Batchelder's, is the crux of the issue. Am I right?
Well, I believe that in granting the appeal, you kind of decided against the way that I was measuring the frontages and coming up with that minimum lot frontage requirement. So I think you opened the door to considering these other options, and it was just a matter, in my mind, it was just a matter of presenting the information to you at this meeting and then having you decide which you felt most comfortable with agreeing with.
Well, the measurements you have now exclude the lot on Colony Way, and they changed the lot dimension, lot measurement across the street on the corner of Arcadian Way. So you're 77.5. Your 82 comes up with that, plus the manner in which you measure the ones there on Revelry Court. So that's what we're looking at. Mr. Barr is arguing that they should be measured in a straight line distance from top to bottom, east to west, basically. And you're measuring it from corner to corner, which gives a little bit greater distance, by the tune of 33 feet. So I think it all rests here on the measurement of Revelry Court.
Yes, sir. And I do think we had this same conversation. I know one of the arguments was that the appeal was to measure Revelry Court the way that I'm suggesting, but there was also a comment about measuring the court length. So I think Mr. Batchelder simply did it both ways to bring it back. But if obviously it's the board's decision where to go next with this.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not advocating either one of these methods of measuring this personally, but I think that in the decision to grant the appeal last week, you said, we're going to set your method, Mr. Batchelder, aside, and we're going to come up with a different method. And that's what I'm showing you is what those other options would yield.
Yeah, I've thought of another relevant point. Mr. Batchelder was originally measuring these Revelry court lots on an arc measurement. I'd forgotten that. He had measured them originally on an arc measurement in his original calculation. And so that was one of the subjects of the appeal. So as we presented it last time, again, I think the board did overrule the arc measurement, but then that invites the question whether the measurement should then be by the linear, what I'm referring to as the linear measurement, or by the chord measurement.
Does the board have any questions about where we are now?
My concern is doing something different than what Mr. Batchelder typically does. I mean, if he usually measures it in the way that he did originally for other properties, then I'm concerned about changing that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That the measuring is not consistent, so it would change for this, applicant. I don't know, that that me, but it might not be an issue, but that's one of my concerns.
Well, Mr. Batchelder can answer that, but that court is so unique in the way those lines run. I don't know that anything just like that's been encountered before. I don't remember anything like that.
Right, but I remember the discussion last time was more about what Mr. Barr just mentioned was that he measured on the arc and I had asked the question during the last meeting if that's what he typically does, and he said yes. Is that correct, Mr. Batchelder?
That is correct. Yes. Which, again, I understand that the board made a decision, and I'm not going to contest that at all. It's just, I kind of went against my recommendation. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out what you want me to do.
Mr. Batchelder, I have a question. When you consider that these 4 lots, or would you consider that these 4 lots are, when considering frontage, across the street from the subject property, in the sense that they're across Reveille Court?
Right.
So these would essentially be 4 independent subject lots, not a single lot. And the reason I ask that is only the basis for looking at the 312-foot length doesn't seem to apply, because that would be including a street as well. It seems like these are the 4 lots across the street, and we should be looking at their independent frontages, independent of whether that's the chord length or the arc length. I just wanted to point out that it doesn't seem appropriate to look at the 312-foot length when I think that the independent 4 frontages would be the actual values we'd be considering.
All right, well, let's close the public hearing portion on this issue and see if we can come to a resolution. Any other questions or any comments by the board?
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
I do feel like Mr. Barr he mentioned it during this meeting, but also he spoke at length during the last meeting about the history of the lots, which I do feel like that's a very good argument about the 75-foot frontage. But my concern all along has been changing the measuring technique, and that was why I voted against it. But anyway, I do feel like that he makes a great case for the 75-foot frontage because of the history of all the lots.
I think I mentioned it last time as well. I think Mr. Barr's case is well stated. Also, when maybe some of you don't know, I'm in the real estate appraisal business, and we deal with things like this on a very frequent basis. And we generally look at straight line distances when we're looking at frontages. When you deal with this, I think, for instance, if there is an assessment by a utility company for running water line down a street that heretofore didn't have water, and they assess the lots based upon frontage, I think they generally take straight line. So if you look at the lot right now, it's on the screen, lot 3, that's very unusually shaped. They would take the lot line on the right, extend it all the way out into the street, and then run that line across to the other lot line that you see, rather than taking it from corner of existing lot to corner of existing lot. And that would probably unduly penalize that particular lot by a little bit in the way of the assessment for the water line. So I think Mr. Barr's case on that is well taken. I appreciate Ms. Grass's comments, because that's one thing we don't want to do is set a precedent. But this is so unusual on these particular 4 lots. All of them have a little bit of a skewed frontage, except with maybe the lot 2 is more straight, but the other 3 are very definitely have an awkward frontage presentation. But I think Mr. Barr has made a good case. Any other comments? Any motions?
Can I ask what we're voting on? Are we voting again
I
for
think
this?
voting, last week, we approved the appeal to change the lots that were included in the measurements. And they don't appear in the measurements that are in front of us today. I think we have two ways of calculating them. One is the way on these particular 4 lots that Mr. Batchel has drawn it in. The other was the way Mr. Barr represented it. It represented the calculation as being a straight line distance from the top of lot 1 all the way to the bottom of lot 4. And those are the way the calculation is made to yield a shorter average frontage distance. And Mr. Batchel's way of running it on the diagonal yielded a little bit larger. And if Mr. Barr's is accepted, there's no need for variance.
As a point of clarification, you're not mentioning option A, you're referring to option B and then the approach presented by Mr. Barr. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
I think at this particular point in time, that's why I wanted to move on beyond the appeal, because the appeal's already been granted. Now we're looking at actually approving how the calculation was made. And, it's my feeling that maybe we should do that in item number 3. But what we're being asked right now, the way we're hearing this case, is to choose the method of calculation that was represented on Mr. Batchel's drawing, and then the way represented by Mr. Barr in a straight line.
I'll make a motion to accept Mr. Barr's calculation technique, and would just like to emphasize that with the motion that this is a very unique application, the lots are very unique, and that's why we're taking this measure.
There's been a motion made. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Mr. Bennett, is there any comment? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Judon?
Aye.
Mr. Rass?
Aye.
Ms. Richards?
Aye.
Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. Robinson, aye. The motion unanimously passes, and the method of calculating the frontage of lots on item number 2 is as presented by Mr. Barr, which yielded a straight line distance of 312.37, giving an average lot width of 77.5 feet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Item number 3, 692 Arcadian Way, Avondale. Request variance from section 54-824 to allow subdivision, create 4 lots, do not meet the minimum 105-foot lot frontage requirement on a public right-of-way. Lot frontages will range from 75 feet to 81.67 feet, zoned SR1. Mr. Batchel, I think based upon the outcome of item number 2, that I can strike this from the agenda. Is that correct?
I believe that's the case. I just want to confirm with Mr. Barr, I guess, that the minimum frontage, he said, I believe in the previous discussion, that it was going to be 77.4 feet in the proposed plat, which is
Yes,
this.
and Yes, and I will say this, Mr. Batchelder and members of the board. That 77.4 is the average. So we're prepared to go back and adjust each of the lots to conform with that because the actual widths of the subdivided lots as proposed are respectively 75 feet, 81.67, 77.96, and 75. So the average of that is 77.4. And so we're prepared to actually go back and adjust those widths so that they fall on 77.4, Mr. Batchelder, if that's where you were headed with it.
So the two lots that are 75 feet would be increased in width to 77.4?
Correct.
Okay. Well, in that case, if that's what the applicant is proposing to do, then I don't feel that there would be a need for a variance. I agree that 77.4 versus 77.5 is de minimis, and there's no need for a variance at that point.
Should we go back and do an after the fact condition on that prior approval to
We would consent to that, Mr. Robinson. I think that's a good idea.
and if we could put that as a condition of the approval, that all the lots be adjusted to 77.4, at least
Right.
77.4.
Correct.
Does that meet with the board's approval?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we're in item number 3 somehow. And so I think we, Mr. Batchelder, that we can strike that from the agenda.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Item number 4, 32 Council Street, Charlestown. Request special exception under section 54-110 to allow an existing stair landing to be relocated, having an existing 0-foot rear setback, to allow a 1-story porch terrace addition that extends a non-conforming 5-foot rear setback, 25 feet required, zone SR2. Mr. Batchelder.
Okay, so we're looking at a residential lot in the Charlestown neighborhood. The property is located on the southeast corner of Council Street and Gibbs. The home does not face Gibbs, it faces Council Street, so there's a Council Street address. Here is the zoning map showing that the property has an SR2 zoning. And you see the building footprint or footprints because there's a small accessory building in the corner of the lot that's not part of this application. The application concerns changes and that are proposed to the existing house. And this is the application that was filed by the applicant, all part of the record. So they're asking for a special exception to allow an existing stair landing to be relocated on the back side of the house, and to allow a 1-story porch terrace addition that extends the non-conforming 5-foot rear setback. So they have explained that they feel that they meet the special exception requirements. Here's an aerial view of the house today. Street view, see the front door and other views. This is the existing south side of the home in a small garden area. And you can see there is a very large tree right here. This is a 33-inch diameter cedar tree. And then there's a small accessory building right here in the back corner of the property. And it's in this area right here where that small stair and landing and doorway is located, that they are proposing to add this one-story porch terrace. And this is just another view. Oh, this is the view of the back area, the back side of the house, and the stairs that they're proposing to relocate. They would move from this area of the rear side of the house over to this area right here. And that door would obviously move as well. So this is the existing survey of the property. And this is a elevation view from the original drawings when the house was constructed. These were the architectural plans, and I think it was, I can't see the date, can't read the date, but I think it was around 1930, something like that. And these elevations, 1936 plans. So these elevations show that they originally planned to have this terrace on the south side of the house. It was never built. And these plans show existing site plan on the top and proposed site plan down here. Now, one thing I'll mention is that there's a pool shown here. That is proposed, and as far as I know, it's still in the plans by the owner of the property, but it is not part of the application. And I will be recommending that all references to the pool be removed from the plans, assuming the board grants the approval for this. And I would want that all these references to the pool, this proposed pool, to be removed from the plans before we would actually stamp the plans and give them our approval and send them back and allow the project to move forward, because that's a separate matter. If they do propose the pool, they'll have to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals and seek the board's approval. This is the site design board. They would have to seek the approval. Sorry. They would have to seek the approval to place that pool in that location. So that's a separate matter. We don't want to confuse this. But you can see where the one-story porch terrace addition is proposed over here. And then on the back side, you see these stairs being shifted from the current location right here over to this location. And here's a blow-up view of that. So here's the new location, the stairs, and then the proposed porch terrace addition. And what you also see in this plan is this circle, this radius around the grand tree, the 33-inch cedar tree. That is the protective zone per the zoning ordinance requirements. If there was going to be an encroachment by this terrace into that zone, there would potentially be another approval that would be necessary from the Board of Zoning Appeals site design. But that is not the case. They are not proposing to encroach into that protective zone with this proposal. So we don't believe that's an issue either. So moving on. Again, another simpler diagram showing the proposal. And this is more of the documents that were submitted by the applicant with their application, this foundation work here, new footing over here for the porch, and the floor plan. So this is the existing set of floor plans and proposed set of floor plans showing the changes. Here's the new stairs over here, new covered porch over here. And then second floor, here is the existing floor plan. And the proposed floor plan includes a new doorway right here that will provide access to a terrace on top of that addition. And then top floor, half story changes. So in elevation, see the existing elevation on the top and the proposed elevation below, showing that proposed addition right here. And rear elevation, again, the new location of the stairs in the back and this porch addition right here. Those are the two elements that require your approval. And side view and the south side view. So that concludes the materials that were submitted by the applicant, and I'll go back to the site plan. Our recommendation is for approval. We feel that the applicant, in this case, this is a special exception, and the special exception test, which let's see, did not include the language in the, but I'll go back to the applicant's materials. That's what I want to do. So pursuant to section one, it should be 110. It's limited, this is a special exception request. It's limited to extending or increasing the non-conforming use already in existence. It does not result in an unreasonable intensification of the non-conforming use. Back stair is simply shifted over and the new covered porch is unheated and modestly sized. It does not encroach into a side setback. It's only the extension of the rear setback that we're dealing with these additions and changes. And that they will not have any adverse impact on the properties in the vicinity. And in the case of the new covered porch, actually, it reflects the original designer's original circa 1936 plan. So we recommend approval of this request. And I don't know if anybody has signed up to speak in this matter. Penny, could you?
No, Mr. Batchelder, no one has signed up to speak regarding this application.
Either in favor or opposition?
No, Mr. Robinson, not in favor nor opposition.
The city recommends approval. There is no opposition. Is there any discussion or motion from the board?
I move for approval.
Subject to the removal of the pool from the
Subject to
driveway.
the removal of this, yeah.
Second.
Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Judan,
Aye.
Ms. Grass,
Aye.
Ms. Richards,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion is unanimously approved. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is number 5. Excuse me, it is not. It's item number B1. And that is number 19 Lambeau Street, Charlestown. Request variance from section 54-301 to allow a one-story addition, kitchen, den, and steps having a 43% lot occupancy, 35% limitation, existing lot occupancy 38%, zoned SR4. Mr. Batchelder.
Again, we're dealing with a existing home in the Charlestown neighborhood and a proposal to construct an addition that will extend, well, this will require a variance, I'm sorry, that will increase the lot occupancy of the buildings on the property from 38% to 43%. And 35% is the maximum allowed by the zoning of the property. So here's the property, Lambeau Street, halfway between Legree and King Street. Application materials, the applicant's explanation of why they feel they meet the variance test. A map showing the property, aerial view rather, showing the property. And of course, this is within an area of the city where probably many of the homes in the immediate area exceed the 35% lot occupancy limitation of the zoning of the property in this area. So not an unusual thing to see with homes on relatively small lots in this area. And in this aerial view, you see the existing property at 19 Lambeau Street. The building footprints are pretty accurately shown here, I think. There's a large accessory building in the back, and then there's the main house. And if you look at some of the neighboring properties, it looks like they have lot occupancies, the total occupancy by the buildings as a percentage of the lot that certainly are greater than 19 Lambeau's lot occupancy, and probably similar to what the applicant is proposing with their request tonight. So these are photographs of the existing property. That's the front. Other views of the property. This is the driveway from Lambeau. And there is this accessory building in the back. You can see a part of it right now in this photograph. Other views across the street. And then these are views of the different sides of the house. And what you'll notice is that there is this area right here. And this is the area that they're proposing to, where they're proposing to construct this one-story addition. Basically, it would square off the back of the house. So you see in the site plan, the existing at the top, and you see this open area right down here. And then the proposed site plan is shown here. Here in blue is the proposed one-story addition. It's unusual. I guess I'm not sure I've ever seen a single house that had the addition to the rear that lined up. Well, I guess that is the east side of the property, so I should say. But there's a wide side yard on that side, which is unusual. But there is this space over here that they're proposing to fill in with this one-story addition. In elevation view or floor plans, you can see will be a den addition. And then roof over this area. And elevation view, this is the new rear elevation, one-story addition shown right here. And another view, this is the one-story addition here. The opposite side, that's that. So the applicant has obtained letters of support from the immediate neighbors. And I'll just briefly go through those. So at 21 Lambeau Street, and that is the property most impacted by the proposed addition, because that is the property on the west side of 19 Lambeau. The homeowner, let's see, I want to make sure. Ashley Iorio indicates that they support the proposal. Kevin Flynn at 15 Lambeau, which is the property on the east side of 19 Lambeau, has indicated that he supports the application. And Zoe and Bryce Stevens at 46 South Battery, the property to the rear of 19 Lambeau, indicated that they support the proposal. So letters from the immediate neighbors in support. We feel that they meet the variance test and we recommend approval.
City recommends approval. Ms. Ashby, is anyone here who wants to speak in favor of the application?
Well, the applicant is here.
Is there
Ms.
any
Martin.
opposition?
There is no opposition, Mr. Robinson.
There's no opposition. The city recommends approval. Is there any discussion or questions or motion from the board?
Move for approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Judon,
Aye.
Ms. Grass,
Aye.
Ms. Richards,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, excuse me.
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion unanimously passes. Thank you very much. Item number B2 on the agenda is 45 West Pawnee Drive, West Pawnee. Request variance from section 54-301 to allow a detached accessory building, garage storage, with a 5-foot south side setback and a 10-foot rear setback. 9 feet and 25 feet required, zoned SR1. Mr. Batchel.
45 West Pawnee Drive is a single-family home in West Pawnee, West Ashley. And this map shows the location on West Pawnee Drive. Here is an aerial view. The applicant is proposing to construct a new accessory building in the back corner of the property at the end of the driveway. This is their application materials, their explanation of why they feel they meet the variance test, and we can come back to that if we need to. But here's a zoning map just showing that the property has an SR1 zoning in the city, and you can see the building footprints that are pretty accurately shown in this drawing. The driveway is along this, I guess what would be the south side of the property. Here's an existing view of that driveway, looking from the back of the driveway towards the street. And to the left is the existing garage, which the applicant has explained is very difficult to use and doesn't really, isn't really large enough to accommodate vehicles. And one of the reasons it's difficult to use is that you've got this large grand live oak, looks like a live oak right here. And the driveway, of course, has to curve around that tree. And that makes for a very tight turn to get into the garage. So they would like to construct this new building in this area that's shown in the foreground of this picture, and slightly overlapping the back of the house. You'll see another view. These look like the stakes that indicate the corners of the proposed accessory building, and then it would run over towards the side yard or side of the property. Another view, backyard. So this is what they could do to meet the setback requirements. These are large lots, and they do have some room to accommodate additions and accessory buildings without needing variance. However, you can see how the back of the house overlaps the proposed accessory building in this view. And that doesn't work very well from the standpoint of constructing it. It's really not meant to be an addition to the house. It's not designed that way, and that would, of course, need lots of changes in the roof and all that sort of thing. So it doesn't work well in this location. So what they're proposing to do is shift it to the area shown in gray right here, as shown on this site plan. And that places it 5 feet off of the side property line and 10 feet off the rear property line. Now, if they made the garage a little bit smaller, they could have it as close as 3 feet off the side property line and 3 feet off the rear property line, but they don't want to place it that close to their side and rear property line. They'd rather have it be a little bit larger and set it off the side and rear property line greater distance than they otherwise would have to. So that is why they need the variance. It's larger than the size that we would be able to accommodate through a staff approval, no variance required. And that is why it's coming before you. These are just elevation views showing two-car garage with a little workshop area on the side. And it will have a half story for a loft area for storage. These are more views. So that's the proposal. And the applicant has spoken with neighbors. And we have letters that indicate that Paul Saltzman at 40 West Pawnee Drive, the house to the right, the property to the right, or I'm sorry, property across the street, 40 West Pawnee Drive, has no objection to the proposal. Then Jean, Michelle, and Brian's, okay, I'm sorry. Jeff Wood and G. Michelle Wood are comfortable with the proposed addition. They live at 44 West Pawnee, also across the street. And then the homeowner at 49 West Pawnee Drive, the homeowner to the right of 45 West Pawnee, Katrina and Michael Lauer indicate that they have no objections. So I believe that they have secured the approvals, all the approvals that are possible. The homeowner on the other side, Ms. Kirkland, which you can see her name at the bottom of this view, is in a nursing home. So I feel comfortable supporting this request. I feel that they do have some challenges. You can see on this plan that the trees, the grand live oak tree right there, create some challenges for using the existing garage. And so they're proposing to basically relocate their garage to this accessory building in the back. And so my recommendation is for approval.
City recommends approval. Ms. Ashby, is any opposition?
No, Mr. Robinson, no opposition.
There's no opposition. Are there any questions from the board or any motions?
I move for approval.
Second.
A second. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Judon,
Aye.
Ms. Grass,
Aye.
Ms. Richards,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion is unanimously approved. Thank you very much. Item number B3 on the agenda is 2420 Thaxton Street, Melrose. Request a variance from section 54-301 to allow an addition, carport, with a 2-foot east side setback, 9 feet required, zoned SR1. Mr. Batchelder.
Another single-family home in West Ashley. The map shows its location on Thaxton between Melrose Drive and Trent Street. And here's a zoning map showing that this property is zoned SR1 in the city of Charleston. And the applicant's materials that they submitted, existing photograph showing the property. So you have the driveway, this existing garage carport area, and then you see how the driveway provides another parking space on the side of the house. It's in that area that they are proposing to build this carport addition. And the site plan shows the location of this proposed addition. And the, which is where that car was parked. And this shows their proposed design for this carport addition. The addition would be 10 feet wide. And according to this, the total side setback right now between the side property line and the existing house is 13 feet. So it'll be about 2 feet of setback, maybe a little bit larger because the posts are inset from the edge of the roof, but that's the proposal. And I don't need to talk about that. So we do have in the file an indication from the neighbor at 2414 Thaxton Street, Jack and Jackie Russell, who sent an email to the applicant indicating that they are aware of the applicant wanting to build a lean-to between their house and his house. And we do know that it will be approximately 2 feet 6 inches from our property line, and we agree to this. So they are basically agreeing to this proposal, and they are the most affected neighboring property owner. And so my recommendation is for approval of this application, and based on the support and the fact that there is this existing driveway on the side, and so it seems like an appropriate location to build that addition.
City recommends approval. Ms. Ashby, is there any opposition?
No, Mr. Robertson, there's no opposition.
Any comments, questions, or motions from the board?
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Judon,
Aye.
Ms. Grass,
Aye.
Ms. Richards,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion is unanimously approved. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is number 10 Ashley Avenue, Charlestown. Request a variance from section 54-301 to allow stair addition with a 7-foot south side setback and to allow a 2-story addition, storage, sunroom, office covered patio with an 11-foot south side setback and a 15.8-foot rear setback, 12 feet and 25 feet required, zoned STR. Mr. Batchelder.
Again, a single family home, this time in Charlestown neighborhood on Ashley Avenue, shown here on the map. It's opposite the horse lot. Another zoning map showing the approximate building footprint that exists today. And the zoning is STR, single and 2-family residential. Aerial view. So the addition would come off the existing house in the back approximately in this area right here. And I will just point out that since we have the map up, that the applicant has secured signatures from this property immediately to the rear on Colonial Street, 7 Colonial Street. R. Elliott Allen, 8 Ashley Avenue, which is this property to the south of the subject lot. Nunn Hutchinson, and the owner of 12 Ashley to the north, Leslie Lyon, indicating that they are aware of the plans and basically support the application. And this is what the applicant is proposing to do. So let me just run through this application materials. So this is the existing footprint. There are these stairs right now that come directly off the back of the house. And then there's this HVAC platform back here. But this is the 2-story house footprint right here. And so it has a 22.4 foot setback from the rear property line. These are just Sanborn maps showing information that they wanted to provide. Existing photographs right here. And the proposed site plan. So the existing back of the house you see on the right is the existing site plan. So there is the back of the house. And and with this proposed addition, there would be a 2-story addition that comes off, as well as these stairs on the side. The stairs require the variance to encroach into the side setback. They'll have a 7-foot side setback. And then the 2-story addition would have an 11-foot setback, actually a 15-foot 8 rear setback, and an 11-foot setback off the south side. So that is essentially the request. Here's a close-up view. The stairs come off the side right here. And but this is a 2-story element right here. These are just so proposed rear elevation is shown here. And I'm going to just skip, okay, side view. So this gives you a good indication of what the proposal is. This is the addition, basically this area right here, ending off the back of the house. And then this is perspective, and this is the addition right here being proposed. So our recommendation is for approval. If I went back to the map, you would see that there are some homes that do extend into the rear setback, and these are small lots, minimal yards, and with the support of the neighbors, we don't feel that this proposed design will adversely impact any of the neighbors, and so we recommend approval of the request.
City recommends approval with adjoining neighbors agreement. Ms. Ashby, is there any opposition?
No, Mr. Robertson, no opposition.
Is there any questions or comments or motions from the board?
I
I'll
move
move for
for,
approval.
second,
That was moved by Ms. Richards,
Yes.
yes,
second by Mr. Judon.
correct.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Judon,
Aye,
Ms. Grass,
Aye.
Ms. Richards,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion is unanimously passed. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is number B5, 270 King Street and 71 Wentworth Street. I believe Ms. Richards will recuse from this issue, from this item. Request special exception under section 54-220 to allow a 12-unit accommodations use in the GBA zone. General business accommodations. Mr. Batchelor.
I'm gonna try and keep my comments fairly brief on this application. I believe there may be some concern or opposition to this application, so I'm gonna keep my comments fairly brief, and then then we will move to the applicant and let them make their presentation. So 270 King Street, 71 Wentworth Street is the commercial property on the southeast corner of King Street and Wentworth Street. The board a few years ago granted a variance or a special exception, I don't recall which one it was actually, to not require the applicant to provide off-street parking for 12 proposed apartments in the upper floors of this building. And that was approved with a condition that the applicant, the proposed developer of this property, come up with a design that was satisfactory to the neighboring property owner for a gate along the Wentworth Street driveway for the neighboring property. And so that approval was granted, that condition was made, and to date, those details have not been resolved. So there hadn't been any issuance of any building permits to actually make the improvements to the building on the corner to build those apartments. But that approval remains in effect, and the condition remains in effect. Now the applicant developer is requesting your approval for a zoning special exception to allow a 12-unit accommodations use. Basically, they would like the option of having the apartments also be able to be used as short-term rental type units, hotel room type units. And that is the nature of the request. So the applicant submitted their application materials, and this is a special exception request under section 54-220, which they explain in their application materials. And then they go into all of the requirements that are listed in the zoning ordinance for a special exception under section 54-220. And speaks to there not being a net loss in dwelling units that have been occupied within the last 5 years. That's not an issue. There have not been any dwelling units occupied in this building. So A doesn't apply. And we go to B, accommodations use if located in the accommodations overlay zone will not reduce or displace more than 25% of the office space that has been used as such within the past 5 years. There's no office space that's been used that way in the last 5 years, so being displaced, so that's not an issue. C, the accommodations use if located in the accommodations overlay zone on the peninsula will not displace more than 25% of the linear frontage of existing ground floor storefront retail space on the property. And we don't feel that that's an issue either with this proposal. The ground floor storefront areas are there today, and those won't be impacted by the proposal that is before you tonight. Location, then it goes into the traffic and whether the proposed accommodations use would significantly increase traffic on streets within residential districts. And we, again, feel they met that requirement. I'm just going through these briefly because I need to do that as part of my presentation, but the location, accommodations use, well, we feel that they meet E, this contributing to the diverse mixed use district. F, they have shown on their plans that they will not exceed the 12% threshold for the bar, restaurant, kitchen, storage, bathroom facilities space. So we feel they meet that. Then going on to G, guest drop-off pickup area. We feel that they meet this requirement, and I'll show you at the end a response from our Department of Traffic and Transportation representative to the on this issue. Total number of sleeping units within the structure lot which the accommodations use is located is equal to or exceeds 10 sleeping units. This is a proposal for 12. And they're not going to exceed the 50 room cap that is identified in subsection R, the next section. So that's not an issue. Accommodations use will not share its buildings, facilities, or on-site operations with any other accommodations use. So J is met. K, they are providing in their revised plans that have been revised just recently, they will meet the requirement for the meeting space based on the number of units in this proposed accommodations use. I'll show that. L, this is not applicable because this is not a full service hotel. Then affordable housing, they will have to pay a fee based on that requirement, so they'll meet that requirement. So those are the findings that the board has to make in order to grant the special exception, subsections A through M. And then the next items are the types of information that the applicant is required to provide with their application. Again, we think they've done that. And I'll just skip through all that. So here's an aerial view showing the building on the site. It appears as a 3-story building, but the upper 2 floors were originally designed for large event spaces, is what I'll just kind of generalize and say. And so they're very tall ceilings that can accommodate additional mezzanine floors, and you'll see that on the plans. Zoning of the property is general business, and this map shows it is within the accommodations overlay zone. This is an old photograph of the building in question. Beautiful storefront with 2 upper floors, very tall floors. And this is the building today. The storefront areas on King Street have been active for many years and occupied, but the upper floors of this building have sat vacant for decades. And various proposals have come along, but nothing has panned out. But finally, a developer with a very successful track record and somebody that does excellent work and has worked in Charleston step forward to come up with a plan to redevelop the upper floors of this building for the 12 apartments, and that was approved. Now they're asking for this additional approval. And with that approval will come a generous investment in the property that will restore the upper floors of the building to the grandeur of the original design, with those very large window openings, unusual. I guess that's sort of a Gothic style of architecture. And the building once again will be fully utilized, which has been a challenge for people looking at this property for years, is how do you make use of this building because of its unusual design. Another view of the side of the property on Wentworth Street. And more photographs of the surrounding area. And then the roof. So these are the floor plans. The existing retail area shown here in the red is not part of the application before you tonight. That's existing ground floor retail. The main entrance for the facility will be here on Wentworth Street. It's the area shown in blue. And then they are proposing in this area to have a restaurant bar area in a space that has been vacant really for a number of years now. But when it was last occupied, it was a hair salon for a number of years. So they're proposing to place a restaurant bar space in there, and that total square footage does not exceed the 6% or 12% cap rather of the net floor area, conditioned floor area of the building. These are the floor plans for those upper floors showing the apartments that they were approved to construct in the previous approval. The floor plans are identical, except for, and this is the second floor plan, then you see the second floor mezzanine view. Oh, that's an up close. I'm sorry, I was confused. But so that's the plan. That's the document that was submitted with the application. This is an up close view of that plan. So then we move to the mezzanine level, second floor mezzanine level. And these are 2-story apartment units. So you see these stairs inside each unit. That's what that is for. It's a little bit confusing, but there are 12 units, 6 units on each floor. And then we moved, and this is the up close view of that second floor mezzanine. But then we moved to the third floor plan proposed, and this will be the up close version of that. And you can see in this area right here, they have set aside 485 square feet as a meeting room space. So this has its own access into the hallway. And here are the stairs and the elevator for access to this floor. So it is separate, entirely separate from any other unit within the building. And this satisfies the meeting space requirement for an accommodations use in this building. And then you see the third floor mezzanine plan. So this is the upper floor of the third floor units. And the up close view of those units. And then they submitted this traffic study, trip generation transportation review from Jennifer Beal to explain how their project will not create any issues and not create an issue with their drop off loading. And so this document, this report was sent over to Michael Mathis of the Department of Traffic and Transportation for the city. And his response is right here, that he has completed the review of the traffic memorandum provided. We have determined that the memorandum provided with the submittal is sufficient in its calculations based on information provided. The proposed use of the renovated building should generate a minimal amount of traffic and should not have a significant impact on the surrounding road network. And so we feel that they've met the requirements of the special exception test for an accommodations use, and our recommendation is for approval. And certainly we can carry forward the condition, the same condition that was attached to the previous approval about the gate for the neighboring driveway, if that is something the board wants to do. But we feel that they meet the special exception requirements, and our recommendation is for approval.
The city recommends approval. Ms. Ashby, is there any opposition?
Yes, Mr. Robinson, there are people that have signed up to speak for and in opposition to this application.
All right, first, we'll hear from the applicant.
Okay,
I'm going to promote Mr. Wilson to be a panelist. And if there's anybody else from his team that he would like me to promote, if he could let me know at this point, I would be happy to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Batchelder. If you could also promote Mr. Miller Harper as well.
Give me just a second here.
Great, thanks. And then our traffic engineer, Jennifer Beal, is also on the line. She's here to answer any questions that may come up on the traffic, if there are any. So may not need Jennifer yet, but just that's our whole team.
So I've promoted Mr. Harper and Ms. Beal, and I will now, if you all are ready, I will go ahead and swear you in.
Great.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
I do.
I do.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is James Wilson with Lambeau Dickinson Law Firm, here on behalf of the applicant, and I have with me Mr. Miller Harper with his partners, Harper and Jennifer Beal, our traffic engineer. What I'd like to do is to add a little bit to what Mr. Batchelder has already provided, and then just make sure we've hit all the criteria, as I know we need to, particularly in this instance, since we are aware there is opposition from one neighbor. And but then let Mr. Harper also give a little bit more helpful and relevant to the decision this evening. So with that said, this is obviously it's a major historic renovation project that Mr. Harper can describe more. The building's 150 years old. It was the old Masons building, and they constructed it and had their hall upstairs and had commercial uses, commercial business on the street level, as is still the case today. The upstairs has been empty for decades. It's a beautiful building, but it's of course very expensive to restore a building like this, and that's why it's sat empty. A number of people have looked at it over the years and tried to figure out how to make this work. We've had a lot of coordination and great support from the city, from the mayor's familiar with the property, of course, and the Historic Charleston Foundation, the Preservation Society has been very supportive, and we've tried to work hand in hand in this process, which is of course really important to the city. As Mr. Batchelder described, we came a couple of years ago for a parking special exception because the building never had any parking on site. It never had a driveway on site or parking on site. It's in a commercial urban district. And that's the nature of this building. And this board granted that approval. So just to be clear, the 12 residential apartments, those are already approved. The board is not being asked to approve those tonight. The board is just being asked, can we use those approved 12 residential units for basically for shorter term rentals, shorter than a month, essentially. And so that's the question this evening with the accommodations use application. These are very large units, as you saw on the plans. These aren't little, typical hotel rooms. These are anywhere from 1,700 square feet to 2,400 square feet. As you see those windows, these are very high floor, very tall floors, the second and third floor, and so there's enough room to create sort of an interior mezzanine level within those. But previous folks who've looked at this building have suggested 20 plus units, apartments in here, probably more than that. The applicant here deliberately said, no, we're going to limit this to 12 very nice large units, and that's important to understand here in terms of impact this project has on the neighboring area. It is not a 50-room or larger hotel that we're talking about here. It's a small project in that regard. When we came before this board, we did not actually have any parking because there is no site. Mr. Robinson astutely observed during that prior meeting that, well, they might have more luck getting a lease if we go ahead and approve them, and that proved true. And we have obtained a long-term 3-year lease for parking in the parking garage, which is right there at 69 Wentworth, right behind the building. So we do have 12 spaces procured long-term, which wasn't required for the residential use, but that's important, of course, for the accommodations use.
What is the term of the lease, Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Robinson, it is a 30-year lease. The zoning ordinance, which Mr. Bethel maybe requires a 10-year lease, but this is a 30-year lease. So the second and third floors would be used for these 12 residential units. The ground floor space that was most recently the Whispers Hair Salon has been proposed for a sort of lobby restaurant bar space. Though parts of it could still be used ultimately for other ancillary uses for the property, meaning meal room or a fitness room, laundry office, utility type spaces as well. But the plan at the moment is to have a lobby restaurant bar in that space. The location, as you realize, is obviously it's a commercial urban area. We're not in a residential neighborhood, obviously, right here. We're in the accommodations overlay, of course, but we also think it's an appropriate location and one that's very well suited for tenants and guests to walk to restaurants and not to negatively impact residential neighborhoods, which is, of course, an important criteria under our ordinance. In short, we think this is a great plan to take the empty portion of the historic building and put it back into productive use with what we think is a very small number of units with low impact in a commercial area that's very walkable and restores a tremendously important architectural structure that's fallen into disrepair over the years. So I should run through the criteria as quickly as I can just to make sure we've hit these, but I'll try to skip over the ones Mr. Batchelder has already touched on well. So running through those under 54-220. So A, no dwelling units are being displaced. B, no office space is being displaced. C, I want to dwell on this for just a minute. The item C of the ordinance requires that the project not displace more than 25% of the linear frontage of existing ground floor storefront retail space on the property. So not displace more than 25% of the linear retail storefront frontage on the property. The Whisper Salon space, the one part, what you see as the restaurant bar space, that is the one portion of the building that on the ground floor that would be affected by this, and that would, as we're proposing to convert that to a restaurant bar type thing. That is about 20 linear feet of frontage on a building that has about 200 linear feet. So the requirement is not to exceed 25%. In this case, what we're talking about is changing about 10%. And frankly, we're not eliminating storefront in the sense that we're going from hair salon to restaurant type frontage. Next point, D, not significantly increase automobile traffic. I think traffic and transportation already weighed in on that. But Ms. Beal has submitted a memorandum. And what's important to gather from that, I think, is that the proposed 12-room accommodations use would be expected to generate about 6 trips during the AM peak period and about 7 trips during the PM peak period. So that's total incoming, outgoing trips. And what's important to understand is that that's actually a lower number than what is generated by residential units. So the point is that this proposed use, this is not an increase of impact. It's arguably actually a decrease of impact when you look at the ITE trip generation calculations. But just want to focus on that point here, is that residences actually generate, frankly, more traffic than an accommodations unit. The point E, contributing to the mixed use district. This is of course a mixed use district that we're in, with retail, restaurant, office, other hotels. We think this is compatible and complementary to those. Item F, not exceed the 12%. Our proposed restaurant bar area is only about 4% of the total space, so we're well below that 12%. Item G, the guest drop off and pickup area. So if Mr. Batchelder, would you mind actually going to the overhead image of the property, just so I can show this to the board? That's perfect. Great, thank you. So, so the leased spaces are actually part of what you're looking at right there on the right-hand side of your screen. So our building is in the middle. You're looking at the roof of the building in the very middle of the screen. And on the right-hand side, you see the top deck of the parking garage. So the 12 spaces that we have leased are actually dedicated spaces right there on the top of that parking deck. And then that square you see kind of in the corner of the top of the parking deck closest to our building, that's actually the staircase, and thank you, the staircase and the elevator there. So guests arriving by car will be able to enter the parking garage from Wentworth Street and go up to the top floor and park there, take the elevator down to street level and walk about 40 feet into the entrance to our project on Wentworth Street. The next point, going back to the criteria H, the number of units, 12 units, that complies with both H and I criteria in terms of the minimum and maximum allowed in this district. Item J, is not basically combining our project with another. We're not sharing our building facilities or on-site operations with any other accommodations use. Item K is the meeting space that Mr. Batchelder described, and we satisfied that requirement with the dedicated 485 square foot meeting space. Item L, full service hotels, we don't fall within that category. That's not applicable, as Mr. Batchelder described. Item M, contribution to the City of Charleston Affordable Workforce Housing Account, will make that payment upon CM. In addition to those findings, the board is supposed to consider these other criteria. I'll try to run through these quickly. 1 and 2 are dwelling units, which we're not displacing. Number 3 is office space, which we're not displacing. Number 4 is the storefront retail space, which, as I said, that we're affecting is only about 20 linear feet of about 200 linear feet, or only about 10%. As I said, the limit is 25%. The guest drop-off and pickup area, already described that, what we're planning to do with that, using the parking spaces next door. Number 6, number of vehicle trips generated. I think what I described, memorandum probably already hits that point. I would just add that, when you look at the total number of trips in Wentworth and King and such, 12 units, whether they're residential or accommodations use, is a relatively minor impact on the existing. And again, the data is, calculations are that the accommodations are actually lower impact. The number 7, this is distance from collector or arterial roads, and Wentworth actually is a collector street. And Meeting Street is an arterial street, which is just down the block. Number 8, land uses within 500 feet. Those are primarily commercial here, and civic uses, restaurants, retail, hotels. There's a couple of churches. There's a synagogue, of course, and office uses. There are 2 hotels in the area, the Renaissance Hotel and the Grand Bohemian in the area. Of course, Charleston Place is not far away. Number 9, the proximity of residential districts. We don't think any residential districts would be impacted. The nearest ones are, of course, on the east side of Meeting Street, and then heading west by west of St. Philip Street, before you get into a true residential neighborhood. Number 10, accessory uses. Our one proposed accessory use is the restaurant bar space. And frankly, it's just not in this item. Criteria relates to proximity, impact on a residential district, which we just don't think that does have any impact. Number 11, off-street parking. That's right. They're really under the ordinance. There are 2 components of this. One is the required number of parking spaces, which is 2 spaces for every 3 units. So applying that to our 12 units, that's a requirement of 8 parking spaces. And of course, we have 12. Another, just skipping down to a later item in the criteria, is provision for employee parking. We obviously have more than the required 8 spaces. And so to the extent needed, we can use some of those spaces to accommodate employee parking as well. Number 12 is not applicable. It is industrial uses nearby. Number 13, commitment to environmental sustainability and recycling. Of course, we are, in a sense, recycling a historic building, and we'll be using original materials to the extent reusable. Number 14, distance from major attractions. Of course, we're very well located in a central district for restaurants and shops and historic areas. So we think we satisfy that easily. 15, we're actually located on 2 corridor routes on King and Wentworth, and just a block away from other cargo routes on Meeting Street for bus service. We will offer employees at least a 30% contribution to monthly bus passes. We'll provide bicycle storage on site. And then, as I said before, we do have some extra parking spaces to accommodate employee parking. Number 17, the number of sleeping units, already covered that, just 12 units. Number 18 is not applicable, deals with shuttle bus service if you're further away from downtown area. 19, commitment to procurement from minority and women-owned businesses, and the applicant is committed to doing that. And then 20, good faith efforts to hire personnel representative of population of Charleston, and the applicant is committed to that. Sorry for the length of that, but thank you for doing that. That said, if we may, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Miller Harper, who's with East Coast Partners, who can just add a little bit more color on the nature of this project, and then Mr. Batchelder and Ms. Ashby, I do think there are a few people who want to speak in support as well after Mr. Harper. Thank you.
Mr. Harper.
I assume everybody can hear me. Can you hear me, Lee? All right.
Please.
Hey, I'm Miller Harper. Thank you for your time today. I'm the managing partner of East West Partners, and we're a real estate development company here in Charleston. This is a building that we've been pursuing since we first opened up an office in Charleston. For years, as I've walked down King Street, we've noticed the building's bricked in and busted out windows, the stucco peeling off, the bricks falling out at times. And I've often dreamed about how amazing it would be to see these 18-foot windows reinstalled and the lights back on this important corner of King Street. We've learned of several people through the years trying to bring this building back, each of them often moving on to other locations in town where it is either simpler to restore a building or oftentimes it's easier to build a new building, and those folks have moved on. And this building has been left behind as much of Charleston's historic properties have been restored and preserved. This is even more surprising when you consider that the original architect of this building, John Henry Devereaux, was one of the most famous architects in Charleston during the late 1800s when he designed this building. He's the same architect that designed the U.S. Post Office and Courthouse on Broad Street. 3 years ago, we put this building under contract and we began kind of peeling back the layers of complexity. And we learned that the complications didn't just include the typical cost challenges of restoring a building that was constructed in the late 1800s. A lot of these Lee and James have talked about already. The complications of, parking. The building was obviously built before there were parking spaces, and we felt that even though this board allowed us to remove the parking requirement, we felt that it was necessary to have built parking for the residents and the tenants of the building. We also, as Lee talked about, the building had been condominiumized years ago, separating the ground floor from the upper floors, which made egress into the building an even greater challenge. So we learned that there are lots of reasons that people had kind of left this one alone, and that these upper floors had sat dormant for decades. As we began to address these challenges, we also began to engage in conversations with various stakeholders throughout the community. In doing so, we quickly learned that there were a lot of people in town that had also admired this building and dreamed of its restoration. We worked closely with the city staff, the Preservation Society, the Historic Foundation. We've met and toured various city council members and both the current and former mayor. Each one of these groups providing great insights and help toward bringing this building back. And we have developed a very unique program that allows us to restore this building to its former glory, and most importantly, to turn these lights back on. As you can imagine, the restoration of this building is extremely expensive, especially to restore it the right way and to the expectations of both ourselves and all of these stakeholders. To give you an example, The Board of Architecture Review requested that we install one window along Wentworth Street as a mock-up. This one window cost us $145,000 to install this past fall. The total window package alone for this building is nearly $2 million. And we believe that a building that is this unique obviously presents unique challenges to which we're required to find unique solutions. And the program that James and Lee have talked about is to create 12 units. These are all 2 and 3 bedroom units. Lee showed you the different floor plans, and I know they're somewhat complex. The reason for the complexity is that in many places as possible, we created the volume, 2-floor volume throughout the unit in the living spaces that allows for those 18-foot windows to be uninterrupted and just, really create just a dramatic effect in the residences themselves. We've worked very closely with a luxury hospitality company that will, with this approval, if we're granted this approval, would lease these residences on a nightly, weekly, or monthly basis. It's a very different product than anything else currently offered in Charleston. This is a product and experience that's synonymous with low impact. This is a client that would be coming to town and would typically stay for a longer period of time because they're leasing 2 and 3 bedroom residences with kitchens and living rooms. They're not just leasing a standard hotel room. The upper floors of this building have been bricked in and sat dormant for decades, and having this special exception for accommodations will allow for our unique program, which will help us start the renovation of this building. Ultimately, it will help us to bring this building back to life and finally turn the lights back on. And I'm available for questions as well as James and Jennifer. So we'll turn it back to you, Lee.
Any questions for Mr. Wilson or Mr. Harper or Ms. Beal?
I have one question just for clarification, and I think that Mr. Wilson addressed it properly, but just to clarify, when Mr. Batchelder started the presentation, you mentioned a turnaround. There's no, did I misunderstand, or were you just saying there is no turnaround? Like a drop off pickup, was that addressed by instead of that, y'all have the area on the top of the parking garage? Is that what?
Yes, Ms. Grass, that is correct. That is what we have. That is the, that's the nature of the building. I would say, as it was originally conceived and still exists today. It was built without any sort of on-site driveway or parking, and so what we've tried to do is the next best thing is to actually procure a long-term parking arrangement, immediately next door. So that is correct. You understand.
Good. Yeah, I was concerned about that, so I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you.
That does beg the question, though, Mr. Wilson. That's a free flowing lane there up against the building on Wentworth Street. And what's going to stop a person checking in to stop there and unload the baggage at the main door and just back up that traffic?
Right. Well, Mr. Robinson, what I would say is this. I mean, that is something obviously we've thought about. But our view of it is that people generally don't just stop in the middle of traffic, or at least in high traffic areas. They find a place to pull over in an empty location somewhere street side. That our belief is that we are in a commercial district. That already is the nature of this commercial district, and our number of units is a relatively small number. That's not going to, doesn't mean there's no impact. What it means is that it's really not a whole lot more impact. We had actually this conversation, and we're going to have more conversation about this as well. So I won't belabor it at this moment, because I know that Mr. Barr, on behalf of Mr. McIntosh, wants to talk about, I think, precisely that. that's a subject when we came to the BZA previously, we discussed because of Mr. McIntosh's concern that people might pull into his driveway. And that's actually the genesis of why we offered to build a new gate on that driveway. So yes, certainly there's some impact of these 12 units, whether the residences or accommodations in terms of people dropping off and picking up. We do believe that in a commercial area like this, that is already certainly the case, meaning there are restaurants and shops and everything else in this area where people drop off and pick up. We don't believe that people either have any right to or will insist on trying to do that right in front of our entrance. And so I'm sure we'll have more conversation about that as well coming up.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak on behalf of the application?
Mr. Robinson, I believe that Miss Carol, Anna Catherine Carroll with Preservation Society, she signed up to speak, and she also sent her letter of support.
So I'm going to allow Ms. Carroll to speak.
Thank you. Anna Catherine Carroll with the Preservation Society of Charleston.
One moment, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me swear you in.
Oh, thank you.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Well, throughout the review process for this project, the Preservation Society has been fully supportive of any measure to see this building rehabilitated with a use that contributes positively to King Street and surrounding neighborhoods. In early 2019, we stood before you in support of a special exception request on this site to allow 12 residential units without required off-street parking in hopes of seeing long-term residential use brought to the long vacant upper floors of 270 King. And while we still feel strongly that this would be the best use to promote the livability and vitality of the lower King Street corridor, and are admittedly disappointed with the requested programmatic shift to an accommodations use, we do not find any issue with the applicant's response to the accommodations test. Having worked with the historic Ansonboro Neighborhood Association throughout this process, we remain hopeful that in pursuing this route, the applicant will be able to execute an exceptional renovation of this building while successfully handling key aspects of the program, such as the proposed pickup and drop off as discussed. Thank you for considering our position.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Board? Anyone else wish to speak on behalf of the application?
I'm not quite sure. I think this is on behalf of the application. This is Ms. Cassiandra Lay with Historic Charleston Foundation has signed up to speak.
Good evening.
Let me swear you in first, Cashin.
Thank you.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Cassandra Lay on behalf of Historic Charleston Foundation. We are in support of the application given the immense preservation benefits and the greater good the rehabilitation of this building will have. The second and third stories of this building, as has been mentioned numerous times, have been vacant for decades. Several proposals have been made to redevelop this building, but were met with barriers posed in part by zoning concerns and parking requirements, and none have been made feasible up until now. And we are really energized to see the upper floors of this building reactivated and returned to use. From a preservation perspective, the owners of this property have studied historic photos in order to return the exterior of this building to its former glory. Great care has been taken to replicate the historic profile of the Gothic Revival windows, which had unfortunately been bricked in. Restoration of this building will make it a positive and stunning addition to this historic commercial corridor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Lay? Anyone else on behalf of the application, Ms. Ashby?
That is all that I know of, Mr. Robinson, that signed up to speak in support.
Is there anyone in opposition?
Yes, sir. The attorney for Mr. Capers is here, And I do believe that Mr. Thomas McIntosh are here in opposition.
Would you promote them, Mr. Batchelder?
Well, I have promoted both Mr. Barr and Mr. McIntosh and to allow them to speak, and I will go ahead and swear you in if you're both ready.
Ready?
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Mr. McIntyre?
I do.
Good. Mr. Barr, you want to start it off?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. For context, Mr. Batchelder, could you go to the first slide following the narrative on the application package? That one, right, yeah.
This one?
All right, this is an aerial, of course, of the subject property, which is outlined in blue. That very narrow building immediately to the right, which would be to the south, there you go, of the subject property is owned by the McIntosh family. It's been in the McIntosh family for many, many years and many generations. Let's go to about the third slide now, Lee. There, right there. There's another view of the McIntosh building. It's that small stone structure to the south or to the right of the subject property. And then let's go to that overhead, Mr. Batchelder.
Was that before or after?
There was another overhead, which was more, that one right there. There you go. So let me now begin addressing the actual substance of what it is that I would like to say. My name is Capers Barr, and I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of my dear friend and retired law partner, Tommy McIntosh, who, as I've said, his property's been in his family for many, many years. Nobody disputes the importance of renovating this property, that it's in bad shape there can be no issue about it. And we're very pleased that both Mr. Batchelder, the BZA, the staff, as well as the applicant here, acknowledge that the earlier agreement that was reached when this board approved zero parking for the residential use and imposed the condition that a gate be placed at the sidewalk to prevent persons from pulling into Mr. McIntosh's driveway. Now you can see that driveway very barely, which is between the subject building, which is in the center of the picture, and the parking garage. In fact, interestingly, right to the right where that parking garage is where Mr. McIntosh was raised. There was an old Charleston house there, a single house there, where Tommy and his sister and his parents lived for many, many years until it was, I guess, sold or demolished for this parking facility. But anyhow, that driveway then goes into the back of the McIntosh building, which is leased for retail commercial purposes. Now, from a subjective standpoint, and the perspective of the McIntosh family, the current designs for the subject property is for there to be a series of open loggias, I think that's the word that's used, on the south elevation of the property. And we can go back though to the slide, Lee.
Oh,
Because, all right, so those open loggias are open to all of the occupants who have properties on whatever floors would be impacted. I don't know, it might be the second floor mezzanine and the third and third floor mezzanine, or just the third and the third floor mezzanine. I can't recall how many loggias there are, but I know that in the issue of the parking variance and in conversations with East West and Mr. Harper and his staff, we have expressed concern about the occupants of the properties with access to those open loges, discarding items onto the rooftop of the McIntosh building, which you see right there below where the loges are. And we're talking about everything ranging from cigarette butts to beer cans, wine bottles, glasses, and outright trash. The roof of the McIntosh building is a rubber rolled roof, which is frankly not one of the most durable available because it wasn't needed, because there's no access now. Now, we got beyond that issue with respect to the residential use, and we came to accept that. But we're now talking about using this same property for transient use as frequently as nightly equivalent of hotel motel stays. There are 12 units, but I might have heard either Mr. Harper or Mr. Wilson say that there are 2 and 3 bedroom units. I can't recall how many bedrooms there are. They can clarify it. But even with only 2 bedrooms per unit, that means there are 24 dwelling spaces on the property. Now, obviously, not all of those are going to be facing have access to the loges, but I submit, again, from a subjective standpoint, the potential for transient users of the property to discard items and objects onto the roof of the building is increased over the probabilities that a full-time resident would be doing the same thing. And I've had a conversation with Mr. Wilson about this, and I don't know whether there's a commitment to this, but they suggested maybe some cameras and signs and stuff like that, but it still doesn't eliminate the risk of that damage to the McIntosh roof. So that's purely a subjective comment as to one of the reasons why the McIntosh family opposes the transient accommodations use of the subject property. Now, honing in more objectively, we take issue with the guest drop-off arrangement as proposed by this application, and that's expressed in the accommodation section 54-220 B1 parentheses small g, which requires that the guest drop-off be located outside of the public right-of-way. Well, there is no dispute but that the top of the roof of that parking garage is out of the public right-of-way. But the problem we present or we suggest is this. I think it could be suggested credibly that a residential user who has a parking space on top of the building is going to drive his car or her car to the roof, park in the space on the garage and walk down or take the elevator down and walk into their residential use. But I strongly doubt, in fact, I strongly challenge the proposition that an Uber driver or a taxi cab is going to drive a transient guest for a hotel all the way to the top of this parking garage, have them unload and take their baggage down the elevator or stairs, probably elevator, and then walk to the entrance of the hotel. Now, as I read it, the guest drop-off issue is a standard that's based upon feasibility. Let me try to find it. I have to pull it up off an iPad I've got here. That's G, I think, G. Yeah, it says the proposed guest drop-off and pickup areas are located outside the public right-of-way. Well, it does say if feasible. and it's been reviewed by the Department of Traffic and Transportation and determined to be safe and not an impediment to traffic. So to the extent that feasibility is a standard, we suggest that the current arrangement expecting that Uber or a taxi will be driving to the top of that garage and offloading transient users of this hotel, as opposed to stopping on Wentworth Street and offloading passengers and luggage right there at the door to the hotel is reasonably feasible. I suggest that that's very likely not going to happen. That section of Wentworth Street is very narrow. I don't think there's any parking immediately over on the north side. I know there's none on the south, and there are two lanes of traffic there, one with a left turn lane going onto King Street nearest the subject building, and the one on the north side of Wentworth being for straight ahead traffic. So our first objective proposition is that the guest drop-off pickup area on the top of that parking garage is not feasible, notwithstanding the fact that it is off of the traffic right of way. Our second objective position relates to the displacement of retail footage, and that's in 54-220B1 parentheses small c. And it says the accommodations used, if located in the accommodations overlay on the peninsula, will not displace more than 25% of the linear frontage of existing ground floor storefront retail space on the property. Now, that invites the question, what is meant by the word property in that criteria? This applicant does not own the building. This applicant owns the property, which consists of the old beauty parlor storefront. I forgot what it was called. And so to the extent that this application is proposing the possibility of uses other than retail storefront, including, and Mr. Batchelder, I don't know whether a bar and restaurant would qualify as retail storefront. I would guess it doesn't. But they throw in the alternative of having it used for lobby space. We suggest that in fact, they're displacing 100% of the existing ground floor storefront retail space on the property. Not on the entire property, admittedly, but the applicant doesn't own the entire property. They only own that storefront where the beauty salon was, which is the 20 or 30 front footage there. So the hour's late, that would be the position that I would state on behalf of the McIntosh family, both the subjective one that they're concerned about debris being thrown out of those logias onto their roof. We believe the guest drop off on that rooftop by Uber and traffic is not reasonable or feasible or foreseeable. It's just not going to happen. And we believe they're displacing 100% of the retail store frontage. And I don't know whether Tommy would like to say anything or not, but that's what I would say on their behalf. Thank you for listening.
Any questions for Mr. Barr? Mr. McIntosh, would you like to be heard?
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I really don't have anything to add to what Mr. Barr said. The only one thing I would point out is that when these Ubers or taxi cabs are unable to stop in front of the front door, they're going to be in the left lane, which is the left turn lane. And they're going to, if they get pushed on by traffic, they're going to make a left turn onto King Street. And the very first metered parking place on King Street is right in front of our building. And with everything that's going on King Street, the last thing we need is having retail parking for customers disrupted by people unloading with baggage and everything there in the parking place in front of our building and carried it along the sidewalk to get in the building on Wentworth Street. I have nothing else to add, and I appreciate your time.
Any questions for Mr. McIntosh? In rebuttal, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll try to hit on each of these points. The first one, with respect to the driveway gate, we are of course committed to do that. We're glad to confirm that in any manner needed. We think that we have actually been working for months with Mr. McIntosh, and believe we have agreed on the design of that driveway gate which is great for all of us, and the cost will be about $35,000, but happily I think we're about there. We've actually drafted an agreement that would include memorializing that obligation, that also deals with other matters, such as, of course, to do this work on the exterior of our historic building, we'll need scaffolding along the exterior along Mr. McIntosh's property, and we've submitted a proposed agreement to Mr. Barr and Mr. McIntosh to review sometime ago, and so hopefully we'll make progress on that as well. With regard to the debris from the tenants and guests on our property affecting the roof of the McIntosh property, what I would say is that we certainly recognize our responsibility as any property owner to monitor and address what tenants and owners are doing on our property, and I would say that this is not a particularly unusual situation in Charleston. We all have lived in homes and had buildings that are right next to each other, and we all have to be respectful of each other's property. And what we've offered and proposed and are happy to commit to is that we'll have a professional management company in our building, and there'll be video. We'll already, normal course, have video cameras in hallways and lobby and such, and we'd be glad to mount a camera under the eave of our building that looks down at Mr. McIntosh's roof, just as a way to monitor and to be able to address anything that arises from that. And so we certainly recognize that responsibility, as any property owner has, but we don't think there's anything particularly unusual about this situation. With regard to the drop-off issue, just to make sure everyone understands what the ordinance actually says, it says that guest drop-off and pickup areas are located outside the public right-of-way and on the property utilized for accommodations use if the accommodations use contains more than 50 sleeping units. We do not. And if you have 50 or less, then the proposed guest drop-off and pickup are located outside the public right-of-way if feasible. So obviously, we don't have a driveway or parking on our property. If we did, that's what we would use. It is not feasible to have that on our property. This building was built to occupy the entire lot without a driveway or parking. So that simply is not feasible. So that's what the ordinance actually says, is that we're supposed to have that outside the public right-of-way if feasible. It's not. And then the ordinance goes on to say that location, design, and guest drop-off, have been reviewed by the Department of Traffic and Transportation, determined to be safe and not an impediment to traffic. That's exactly what we've done. We've reviewed it with them. They've determined that this is acceptable. And so we do believe that we've satisfied that. Just a minor point. I know Mr. Barr was not looking at, like a street image. There is actually on-street parking on the north side of Wentworth in this location, meaning this block of Wentworth does have on-street parking on the north side, not on the south side where we are, but it does exist on the north side. We really don't think this is any more impactful than residential. Again, just to think about the numbers, at peak period, we're talking about three arrivals, 4 departures during an hour of peak period, just to quantify it and put it in context. It's only 12 units, and that's why it's a low number. It's not a material impact, and it's not an increase over residential. And in King Street, Wentworth, this is a commercial district. I know I keep saying that, but this is already the nature of these areas. There are people dropping off and picking up at many locations, restaurants, shops, a variety of other properties there. And so, we appreciate the concern, but the truth is that this is the nature of how our commercial areas work. Lastly, with regard to the retail storefront. So the 20 feet that's affected by that we're proposing to change from a hair salon to a restaurant and bar space. That's 20 feet is only 10% of the 200 linear feet of the building that faces Wentworth and King. So that proposal to change from what was a hair salon to a restaurant bar space is what Mr. Barr and Mr. McIntosh are objecting to. We think that's a pretty reasonable use of that space. But in any event, Mr. Barr is asking you to just look at a sliver of this building, not actually look at the whole building, even though our project occupies more than 2/3 of the entire building. I think it's important to understand that in a condominium form of ownership, you divvy up the interior of the building, but the entire exterior of this building is common element. That means it's owned in common by all of the building owners, including the applicant as the great majority owner of this building. We're not asking the board to look at an adjacent property and say, oh, count that adjacent property as part of our building. This is a single building, and should be looked at as such. I also think that South Carolina law is clear on this subject. There was a case that some of you are probably familiar with called Baker v. Sullivan's Island in the 80s, and it dealt with a proposed conversion of apartments to condo units out on Sullivan's Island. And our courts were clear about it. They said that the conversion of a building to condominium units is basically irrelevant to zoning use provisions. Effectively, I think Mr. Barr is suggesting that, well, since it was converted, you should look at it as a separate property. I don't think that's what South Carolina law says. I don't think that's what condominium form of ownership actually does. Ultimately, the intent of this relatively new provision of the ordinance is to make sure that we as a city don't lose too much retail space. And simply put, in this case, we're not losing too much retail space. The overwhelming majority of it on this building is being retained. So with that said, of course, any of us are glad to answer any questions, and we would respectfully request the approval of the board for our application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I've got a few questions. Mr. Batchelder, the prior approval was conditioned upon a gate being placed at Mr. McIntosh's driveway. That is still on the table, is it not? So there's no requirement that we put that in this approval or this issue.
Yes, I believe that's still part of the approval for the property that still has to be met.
Okay. The next question I have is for Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson, as to debris being thrown from the windows onto Mr. McIntosh's roof, is there any other way to mitigate the potential for that happening other than the ones such as screening or anything such as that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we've talked about it, looked at it. These are large open spaces here on the south side of the building, and so they don't lend themselves really well to screening. We did think about that. We really want to be respectful and monitor this and careful of it, and we're glad to do do everything we can to do that. We don't have frankly, we don't have just a good solution to to close in those spaces. We could come up with some way to put signage perhaps out there, for that guests would see, and certainly want to monitor it, and if there's a problem to make sure that we're dealing with it promptly and do what it takes. But we just didn't have a silver bullet solution to it.
Thank you. Mr. Batchelder, one more question for you. As to the drop-off issue, this was reviewed by City Traffic and Transportation and signed off on?
Yes, that's correct.
And as one more question on the commercial space issue, is the calculation of the linear footage. What is the city's position on that one more time, please?
Well, I agree with the applicant that the property is the entire property, not just the portion of the building that is being proposed in this application to be an accommodations use, but the entire ground floor space. So, so therefore, I think that they have satisfied the requirement.
Thank you. Anyone else from the board have any questions of anyone?
I do.
Please.
Okay. For Mr. Wilson, what I guess, just to kind of understand and maybe help Mr. McIntosh understand too, do y'all have a plan to ensure how guests use the parking garage as, make sure that they use the parking garage as the drop-off point? And then how would the Uber enter the parking garage and things like that? I mean, do y'all have a plan for that? That might be helpful in explaining how you're encouraging guests to use that space instead of using the street.
Sure, good question. We are going to, of course, make it known to tenants and guests that they do have access to those spaces. There'll be basically a pass that they will have use of to get in and out of that garage as they want to. That'll be communicated to tenants and guests, of course, because frankly it's an attractive element of this property to have that convenient parking right there. And so that's the case. As far as Uber and Lyft, I don't know that we've figured out a way, how to best communicate to them how to do this. But again, would submit that we're talking about a relatively small number, particularly when you put it in the context of what does take place in not just Charleston, but any urban area. This is part of our transportation system today, and it's not perfect, but it does in fact function. So we don't disagree with Mr. Barr that it's probably unlikely that Uber drivers are actually going to say, "Oh no, we're going to drive up to the top floor of this parking garage for you to get out of my car." As you know, typically what they do is they find a location where they can pull out of traffic and allow people to exit or enter the car, and that is a commonplace occurrence in Charleston as anywhere. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think if I was Mr. McIntosh, I would have these same questions. If I own the property next door, and you see the diminutive size of his building compared to the one next door, it looks, it's a little overwhelming. but we're dealing with the circumstances that exist, and the property owner of the building next door at 270 King has a right to utilize it and to build it out as would be reasonably feasible. I think those issues brought up by Mr. Barr, Mr. McIntosh would be brought up by any particular use of the building next door if it were put to commercial use or whatever. I think there would be a tendency for cars to stop there and unload whatever they have, and instead of going to the top of the parking garage, it's going to be a monitoring issue. And you know, I guess if it creates a problem, the city would weigh in on that as well and do something to try to keep that from happening too much. The issue of the trash, I'd be concerned about that if I was Mr. McIntosh coming out of the windows. And I think Mr. Wilson explained that quite well, saying that we all deal with that living in tight confines like we do in downtown Charleston, commercially and residentially. And granted, tenants, short-term tenants particularly, are probably going to have a little less concern than full-time occupants. And but once again, that's an issue we're dealing with on this particular building, and they have the right to do it as we go through the ordinance. It appears that they generally meet all the requirements. They do exceed the number of units by 2, 10 is allowed. They're looking for 12. We've already approved 12 apartments. Parking issue is not on the table. They've improved upon that by bringing in 12 spaces next door, which is about as convenient as you could possibly get. You know, I think overall, even understanding Mr. McIntosh's concerns, I think the applicant has built a strong case. That's my opinion.
I have a question for Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson, would your organization be willing to incur any expenses it may take to clean Mr. McIntosh building or pick up the debris? Is that something considered?
Good question, Mr. Judon. Let me say this. I do believe that we would be required to address and clean up any debris that gets thrown over onto Mr. McIntosh's roof. But I do believe, just as a property owner, we would have that responsibility, under our existing laws and ordinances. And so obviously, if folks on our property are doing that, then we're going to have to clean it up and address it. I don't think there's any question on our side about that, and I think we're committed to doing that. I'm not sure how else to say it, but my answer is yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Are there any motions?
I'll make a motion for approval, and I will go ahead and just say with the condition of making sure that the gate is included. I know that we discussed maybe it didn't need to be, but just for clarification, if it's okay if we include that.
We as applicant are certainly very glad to include that as a condition here as well.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Motion second. Are there any comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Jadon?
Aye.
Ms. Grass,
Aye.
Ms. Richards. Oh, pardon me, she recused. Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion is unanimously approved with the condition that the agreement between the property owner and Mr. McIntosh about a gate be constructed in his driveway be in effect on this approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We can bring Ms. Richards back now.
Okay, I've gone ahead and done that. Yes, she was back.
Okay.
Okay, the last item on the agenda, I think it's the last one. Nope, beg your pardon. Item number 6, 10 LaFar Street, Daniel Island. Request variance from section 54-823 Daniel Island Master Plan zoning regulations to allow an existing garage to be enlarged. Garage bay elevator addition that increases the total garage footprint of 941 square feet to 1,205 square feet. Ordinance limits the footprint to 1,000 square feet. Zone DIR. Mr. Batchelder.
Okay. I'll straighten that here. Ten LaFar Street is a residential property on Daniel Island. And on Daniel Island, we have a zoning ordinance that is unique to that island. And many of the same zoning rules apply to the island, but there are a number of exceptions, especially when it comes to residential properties on the island. And one of those restrictions is on the size of the accessory buildings. So on the north end of the island, north being above the I-526, we do have rules that allow for very large footprints for these accessory buildings, and the limit is 1,000 square feet. So quite large, unique to Daniel Island. And we do have a number of large lots on that north end of the island that that do accommodate those large footprints. In this particular case, you can see this lot is very unique in that it is includes a peninsula of highland that extends into the marsh. And also there's an adjacent lot that was combined with the peninsula portion of the property. So it's actually 2 lots of record. And this is the application material. Here is the aerial view showing the existing home on this lot. And this is the adjoining lot that is now part of the 10 LaFar Street property. And one thing I'll point out, because I think this is a good way to illustrate this. So you see, of course, a lot of other lots on this map that are very similar in that they're basically rectangular in shape and offer opportunities for large accessory buildings. This particular property, or actually allow for large garage spaces that are part of the main house, is what I meant to say. So many houses on this area, in this area of Daniel Island, have 3-car garages. Some even have more. And oftentimes all or a portion of those garage spaces are part of the main house. You see right here, for instance, here you've got a 3-car garage on this unusual property right here, also on a peninsula. But what's unique about this property is that it is very narrow. So the house is set towards the back of the property. There are large grand trees up at the front. And there is a visual buffer zone that wraps around the perimeter of the property that can't have any buildings in it. And that is a visual buffer zone that runs along the critical line. So if I move on, here's the zoning map, just showing the zoning of the property as residential. These are views of the existing accessory building, a 2-car garage, 1.5-story building. More views. And what they're proposing to do is build a 3rd bay over here. So, and here's the overall site plan for the property. Now, this area right here, this 25-foot visual buffer zone, is the area that can't have any buildings within it. So that you'll see that there are no buildings encroaching into that 25-foot zone that runs around the perimeter of the lot. And what that does is that makes this peninsula of land even narrower. And you can see that when they were designing this house and building it a number of years ago, they really didn't have the option of putting a garage in the building, in the home itself. They had to do this accessory building here and breezeway to attach it, because there's just simply not enough width here to accommodate the garage and the other requirement, which is you can't have a front-facing garage door. It has to be on the side, or not facing the street. So that wouldn't have worked on this property. They had to do this accessory building for the garage space. And I think that is what creates the hardship here, because you're really limited as how you can provide the garage space for this home. And these are just up close views. This shows the proposed addition to the garage. And the plans have been revised since the application first came in, and the revisions have been based on the feedback that they've gotten from the Daniel Allen ARB. And those revisions have reduced the overall footprint of the proposed garage with this addition from 1,205 square feet, which is what's listed on your agenda, to 1,171 square feet. So the proposed increase has gotten a little bit smaller and a little bit closer to the 1,000 square foot max. These are just plans. These show, of course, the existing trees up in front of the property. Here's another one, very large grand trees, protected trees. And these are plans showing the proposed garage addition. So existing on the top, proposed on the bottom. And then a view of the existing garage and the proposed garage. So another view, the final view. So the applicant has requested this variance, and they've also provided letters from the neighbors that indicate that they have no objections to the project. And I have a letter signed by John Lively, 2 LaFar Street, Dan and Kim Brune, 5 LaFar Street, Jason Douglas of 14 LaFar Street, Beverly Byers of 17 LaFar Street, Adrian Chibert of 18 LaFar Street, Eric Labarca of 30 Hazelhurst Street. These are all people that have signed letters indicating that they have no objections to the proposal. And we feel again that they've met the variance test, that this is an unusual lot that creates challenges. It's a very large lot, but it's a lot that is limited as to how you can provide garage space. And there are, again, many other lots of similar size that do have 3-car garages. So that's not an unusual thing. Oftentimes, part of those garages or all of those garages are attached to the house, so they're not accessory buildings. So for those reasons, we recommend approval of this request.
City recommends approval. Ms. Ashby, is there any opposition?
No, Mr. Robinson, no opposition.
Are there any questions, any motions from the board?
I move for approval.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Judon,
Aye.
Ms. Grass,
Aye.
Ms. Richards,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion is unanimously approved. Thank you very much. Item number 7, 1673 Perlott Street, Stone Oak Park. Request variance from section 54-301 to allow detached accessory building, storage, workshop, porch with a 17.3-foot rear setback, 25 feet required, zoned STR. Mr. Batchelor.
This is a request, another variance request for a detached accessory building on a residential property. This one is in Stone Oak Park in West Ashley. This shows the location of the property on Perlott Street. Applicant materials that were received. They are indicating that they are seeking this variance to replace a current building. It's 30 years old, rotting, much too small for current needs, and they would like to build this accessory building with a front porch and have it function as a workshop storage building. So here is the property in an aerial view. Here's the zoning map just showing the STR zoning on the property. This is a view of the front of the house. And this is a view of the shed that would be replaced. And this site plan shows the location of that shed and the new location of the proposed accessory building. This is a blow up of that survey. So you see right here the accessory building that would be demolished. And then the footprint of the proposed accessory building is shown here. And there's the porch. So it's not a garage. There's no vehicular access to this area of the property due to the very narrow side yard right here. So it's not a garage. It is proposed to be a workshop and storage building. In this case, what is being proposed is a 2-story building. And, you know, this size building could be approved at a staff level if it met other limitations, including that it was only 1.5 story and that it was located behind the existing property. That is not possible given the location of the existing house. So they're proposing to have it be over basically to the side of the existing house, and would still be 6 feet off the side property line, 17 feet off the rear property line. So I have no objections to the request for the variances, except that I don't feel that the two-story accessory building is an appropriate building. I think it should be reduced to 1.5 stories. And there are other accessory buildings, and these are photographs that the applicant provided. So here's a 1-story accessory building that's on Braxton Avenue near the applicant's property. Another view of a Perlott Street shed that's 1 story. Here's one that it's a 1.5 story shed on Perlott Street, 1665. Another one at 1679, that's 1.5 stories. Not sure. This is the neighboring property. I'm not sure what this is. This is a property at, let me see here. This is 1637 Pinckney Park. So this is on the block to the south of Perlott Street, and it's over a few houses. Now, I looked at these plans, and from what I could tell, I believe that this building meets the setback requirements for a principal building, which means there's no height restriction if you can meet those setback requirements. So in that case, no variance was needed. They could build a 2-story accessory building. These are photographs that I saw from Google Street View of some other surrounding properties. So this is 1670 Perlott Street. You see the 1-story building back here. And in aerial view, this is that building, 1670 Perlott Street. Then this is 1664 Perlott Street, another accessory building in the back. And another one at 1683 Perlott Street, the green building back here. So I feel that they have an argument for the variance justifying the setback variance that they're asking for, the 17.3 foot rear setback. But I think it ought to be a 1.5 story building instead of the 2-story building. So that's my recommendation. I know the applicant is present, and I will go ahead and promote them to be a panelist so they can, and I'll swear him in as soon as he's ready. Mr. Hammond, are you ready?
Mr. Hammond, are you present?
So I promoted him. If you can unmute
I'm
yourself.
sorry. Mr. Batchelder, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So let me swear you in. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir, I do.
We'd like to hear from you, Mr. Hammond.
Thank you. I understand the reservations of a 2-story storage workshop building, whereas 1.5 is acceptable. As a builder, a 1.5 just is pretty much unusable. It's not practical, and you can't stand up on the 2nd floor. That's where I'm going to store most of my materials. I'm going to do a little bit of light woodworking on the 1st floor, but I need something that's practical. The building, the 2-story building there, I built in 1991 for my family to live in, my brother and sister. It is 2 stories and would be, I'm thinking, 6 feet higher than my workshop in the back. The building facing the workshop to the left, that's a 2-story home also, approximately 4 to 5 feet taller than my workshop. I think the 2-story workshop is practical. It works for me. It's what I need. It also blends in with the adjacent buildings, residences.
Anything else, Mr. Hammond?
Basically, I just want to say that I grew up on Parallot Street, and my wife and I, our first home was at 1983 Parallot Street. And once again, I built the duplex in 1991 for my brother and sister live in when my mother passed away. I have very strong ties in the neighborhood, and I feel with this front porch, my wife insisted I have the front porch on this, which I do not need, but she wanted to blend in with the adjacent properties. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is anyone else present who would like to speak on behalf of the application?
There's no one else present, Mr. Robinson.
Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to the application?
There's no one present.
Are there any questions from the board or any motions? Mr. Batchel, the city's position is that they are recommending approval of the setback variance. However, only if the applicant reduces the size of the building to 1.5 stories.
That's correct. I will temper my opposition just to say that, as you can see on the site plan, the applicant is proposing a location that meets the side setback requirement. So there's no issue there, and they're only encroaching 8 feet into the, not quite 8 feet into the rear 25-foot setback. So maybe the board will take that into consideration. I don't know. I think it's a little bit tall, but I do kind of understand what the applicant is saying, and you know, so anyway, I'll just say that I'm lukewarm in my opposition.
Let me ask this question of Mr. Hammond. Mr. Hammond, I see where there's a Mr. Wharton who owns the property right behind you. Have you spoken to him about this?
Sir, he purchased that property in November. He's flipping it. He's going to resell it. I did go by and show him what I was doing and what I was building and everything. He had no opposition to it. His only concern, quite frankly, was that he wanted to know when I was going to start building it, and I'm ready to build now. And he was kind of saying, well, I'm trying to resell this house, you know, and I'm not sure if I want any construction going on while I'm doing that. And that was his only concern.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, or motions from the board?
I have a question just about the procedure for approval is, so we would grant a variance, but then for the height, would we have to grant any type of variance or special exception or anything? That's just your condition.
It's the setback variance would be necessary regardless of the height. So
Okay.
proposing a 2-story building that would encroach as shown on the site plan. And so if you approve the variance, you'll be approving the 2-story building.
I think you're recommending the condition of the approval if it happens. Does that answer your question, Ms. Grass?
It does. Thank you.
Good. Any other questions? Any motions?
Can I ask one more question?
Certainly.
Sorry. For Mr. Hammond, did you say that you spoke? I know you mentioned that you have some siblings, but did you say you spoke to the owners on that side of the property? I guess on the was that the west? I'm confused. East. Okay, so on the east side.
Are you talking about Mr. Wharton again, or are you talking about
Wester Camp?
Oh, yeah, Kendra and Justin. Yeah, they're aware I'm doing this. He's a firefighter and she's a therapist. And they're aware of it. I didn't ask them to sign anything because, I'm sorry, because the variance, I didn't think affected them. I thought it affected Mr. Wharton the most.
Okay. Thank
Well,
you.
I'd like to say, you know, we rely on city staff to help keep the overview on everything the same all across the entire city. And, you know, we rely on their advice and their recommendations when applications come before this board. At the same time, in this particular case, it was posted and there's no opposition to it. So it's a, you know, it's a tight call, like Mr. Batchel says. Are there any motions?
I move that we go ahead and approve the variance.
Got a motion for approval. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Mr. Jadon,
Aye.
Ms. Rass,
Hi.
Ms. Richards,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson votes aye. The motion unanimously passes and the variance is approved. Thank you very much, Mr. Hammond.
Thank you all very much.
That concludes the meeting. Thank you all.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everybody.
all.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
All
Bye.
right. Have a good evening. Be safe.
Thank you.
Y'all too. Thank you.